Alright guys, in this video we're going to create an API controller, and this might throw you off a bit. The reason we're doing this is because, for one, we're using jQuery. All of our calls are going to be jQuery based. It's an Ajax application. So logically, if I think about this, we're building two extra portions. One's going to be for to-do, the other's going to be for notes. So we have those two categories, and we also have the user category. And these all kind of represent something in our database as well. The problem I have with that is I'm basically creating controllers just to have access points to do a lot of logic. In an Ajax-based application, in this instance, I feel that it should be based under an API URL to do our Ajax calls, so it's all consistent, easy to update and find what we're looking for. And if we need to access models, it'll be very easy too. So that's what we're going to do in this video, is set up our API controller. So we'll create a new file under controllers and call it API. And just type in API, makes you feel cool. Class API extends CI controller. And this isn't really going to have anything like the dashboard does with an index file and everything. We are going to want something like this though in the dashboard construct. So make sure you open your dashboard construct and copy this. Okay, I'll just paste it in here. Now we want the API to be usable, but we don't want it to be used on a certain function, and that's going to be registering a user. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do what we call refactoring. The first thing is, let's comment this out so we don't get ahead of ourselves, is the user controller. It loads the user model. It has a login and a register feature, and these were all tests down here. Okay, so I'm going to cut the register and the login out of it. I'm going to paste them in here, and step by step I have to realize, well, I need the user model to check data. As you can see, we're using it there, and back in our user controller I'll need to cut this guy out, and I'll copy them and leave them here so we can just call this a test class or something. And I don't want to put it in the construct because we don't want to construct the user every time, like if we're going to do a note or a to-do. So I'll throw the user model right here. When they call login, it'll load the user model, and when they call register, it'll load the user model. Now we could actually instantiate it right above where we call it, save a little on memory, meaning if this validation fails, we won't even have the model loaded, which is perfectly fine. And let's see if we can do the same for here. Nope, looks like we're always going to load the user model, but again, I'll just paste it right above him. Okay, so that's step one. Next, we have to realize, where is this being called? So I'll go to my home. I know it's getting called in my home view right here. So this would be API/login. Okay. Then I know it's getting called in register. This would become API/register. Okay. Now let's see. This is the user model. I'm going to rename this to test, and I'm going to rename the user file to squiggly test, and that can't be accessed. We're just keeping a reference of this so that, you know, don't delete old code. You might want to use it someday and look back. So I'll close that guy out. We need to test the login now. So if you updated your database or not, I'll just use the admin login. So admin. Let's see what happened. Let's try it again. Login, and go to network, and PHP undefined property input. Okay. So step at a time. I forgot to do the parent construct. We need the CI controller to be constructed. So let's try that again. Login. It works. Let's try to register a new guy. I'll say John. john@google.com, and his password will just be test. Register, and he's logged in. And just for safe measure, I'll try John and test. Okay, so that works with the API. Now, with this little portion here, what I don't want people to be able to do is call certain functions if they're not logged in. And that's not going to be used in every method, so it should never be in the construct. So at the top, I'm going to say private function require login. And I'll uncomment each line. Okay. And you'll see that this is calling this logout, but that was in the user model. So I suppose we'll go back and just grab that method. I apologize, the user controller. Well, I suppose not. Login, register. Okay. Our logout, was it in the dashboard? I see. Okay. Since this is an Ajax only API, we don't really need to log out. We just need to return that you can't do this without that permission. So I'll copy just this output, set output, and we'll do this and return false. Okay. Now to save on some space, we could just cut this and do that. If the session user ID is false, we will turn result, and I'll throw in an error here. You are not authorized. Okay. Now we're not using this yet, and you might notice that my code convention changed because I'm used to doing camel case, but with URLs, you know, it's going to be one long word. So I'm going to keep with convention and just do require underscore login. So we have login, register, and we're going to create a couple methods here. I'll say public function create to do. We're just templating it out first. Delete to do. Update to do. So we'll copy all these again, and this will be for create note, note, note. And for these, some of these require IDs, so I can already prepare this. I'll say this input post to do underscore ID. Whoops. And I'll say to do ID. And when we delete it, to do. And when we update a note, we're just templating this out right now. Okay. So we know all that. Now we are going to need models for these. So since we just refactored all this code, let's check something. Let's refresh the page and make sure we don't have any errors. Okay, looks pretty smooth. Next, let's do a little bit of code cleanup. Well, not so much code cleanup, but lines of demarcation. I learned this from one of my bosses, and they're beautiful. I'll just do // space and then a bunch of dashes. And I'll just do it one line before the 70th line, like that. And when I put it between each method, it helps to break up what you're trying to read. It might sound really silly, but man, it really helps me. If you're a visual person, this will help you a whole lot. Okay, like that. Just by scrolling through, I can see where things are broken up real quickly. I'll throw it in my home one too. I like to do a space after each one, or a new line. Okay. And what do we got? A dashboard. I always like to keep it at the top and bottom. This is a preference. You can do any kind of demarcation you want. I just like it so much. And our models. So we have one up here. Here. We're going to add parameters eventually. PHP docket, because that's how professionals do it. And this video is to move you on to professionalism. Okay? So that's good. That's good. The thing is, this require login is going to be used now in these methods below. Now remember, we're in the API controller, and I just went to the require login private function we created, and what we're going to do is paste it at the top of each one of these. So they can't create a login, they can't create a to-do unless they're logged in. They can't update it, they can't delete it, they can't create a note, and so on and so forth. That'll wrap up this video. Alright guys, next we're going to keep exploring JavaScript, the Junior Dash folder. And what we're going to do is we're going to build the templates for the items to list out. We need to do this in JavaScript because we're going to be doing a lot of dynamic mambo jumbo. So in here, I like to keep it clean. Let's make a new folder and call it dashboard, because this will be a child of the dashboard. And we'll make a new JavaScript file and call it template. And I spelled that wrong. Template. And just like the dashboard, we could just copy all this code and paste it into the template and pretty much get everything deleted and rename it to template. Okay? We'll say template created. So what are some of the templates we need? We're going to need a to-do template. So I'll say var. Actually, I want to say this because I want it publicly accessible. Dot to-do equals function. Okay. Now notice that I just called it to-do. The reason is it's in the template class, so we're going to reference it like template.todo. So it's not a big deal to be super picky here. Looks like I'm putting these on the same line. Stay consistent. And let's start with var output equals nothing. And we'll say output plus equals, and then return output. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to pass in an object inside of here, and it's going to render a row one by one. And I'll give you an example. So for this, I'm going to start out with a div, I believe. We'll just try that div, and the closing div, and let's throw in a span. Right now this isn't anything really superficial. Now the object is going to need a so this is a to-do list. It's going to need content, and inside this little guy here we're going to want to give him some kind of reference. So I'll say ID equals and plus plus obj dot to do ID. Okay, and this looks a little crazy, don't it? So slow down with me if you need to, and just make sure you have dashboard template and it's in a folder. And then we got to make sure we include this file in the views. Home, whoops, dashboard, inc, header, and include it here. And you want to include it before the dashboard because we're going to call it from the dashboard. So dashboard slash template.js. Okay. So it's kind of like reverse order of the children to the parent. And I'll close him out. And inside of dashboard, in the construct, I want to have templates available. The best way to do that, I think, is if I just give it a big old fat variable. I'll say template equals new template. Okay, so let me try template dot. There should be a to-do in here. Let's see, template.js. It might not be referencing the right code in the IDE. So to do, and I'll pass in an object, And remember, we have a to-do ID and content. So to-do ID, I'll just say 1, and content equals this is life. Okay, and I'll console.log it. Okay, let me just do this, console log, just so you can see what's happening. Okay, so that's all I'm doing, and I want to see what happens when I do this. So I'll refresh, and you see how it rendered this? It put my ID in here, and it put this is life in there. So what we're going to do is, say we have 20 items, we would do an AJAX call, and it would populate these into the DOM here. Okay, so that's just a console log for a test. Let's make one for a note. I could pretty much duplicate this. I'll say note, and this would be note ID, and then it has a title as well. And for now, I believe we can leave this template alone. We'll polish it up later and put actual Twitter Bootstrap based DOM elements in it. So you see how we have a separate template, it's only dedicated to templates. Dashboard is basically the core of the application. Next, let's create an event handler. So rather than have all this stuff filled with templates and events, we're separating our logic. So I'll make a new file and I'll call it event, and I'll just copy the template file. Whoops. And call this event and event. And I could just delete some of those guys. And what we want to do is create a couple listeners. So let's take a look. Inside of here, I'm going to inspect with Control-Shift-C and click. And here is one called Create To Do, and we also know the other one is Note To Do. So I'll say this, or do I want it to be private? Let's see. I believe I want it to be var, because I only want it accessible within this class. So I'll say var, what was the name of that? Create to do equals function, and we'll say create to do dot submit function event, and we'll say return false. And let's just console log for our debug's sake. Create to do was clicked. And let's also do one for create note. Like so. And we need, see, these aren't going to do anything yet, so I'll say create to do, create note. That initializes these methods. And in the dashboard, we need to instantiate event. So event equals new event. So when the event's instantiated, what happens is this class loads, the construct is already hit, and then it calls these guys, and these just listen for the events. So it's basically just an event class that's going to do stuff. And let's make sure we remember to include the event in the dashboard include header. So event, and I'm going to refresh, make sure things look okay. Event created, create to do clicked, create note clicked. That's exactly what we want, you guys. So let's go back to the template, and not the template, sorry, the dashboard. There's load to do, load note. We can get rid of create note, create to do. The updates and deletes will go in the event, so we could cut all this out. We're kind of refactoring as we go. And in the event, let's just paste that in there. Okay, and create note, create to do. So update and delete. So just to save us time, we'll say update to do, update note, delete to do, delete note. This may seem a little redundant, but in the long run, once you build a big JavaScript application, you really want to have some organization rather than one really long file. That's my take on it anyways. And again, I'll refresh to make sure everything feels like it's behaving nicely. So we now have a basic structure for this. I believe that's all we'll need for our structure. Briefly, I think we'll also create a result class. So I'll make another JavaScript file called result, and I'll just copy the event, paste it in the result, pretty much delete everything except for the construct. And we'll say result created and result. So I know this was a lot to follow at once, so I'm going to end this section and include these files up to date so that you have exactly what I have. And let's just say this dot success equals function. Okay, and we'll just duplicate that guy up there, and we'll say error. And this is going to be a custom handler for the result. When they create something or whatever they do, we want to do that. In the header view, I'm also going to create result at the very top. So when an event happens, I want results to be feasible in here. So I'll say result equals new result. And inside of the template, we're not going to need it. And we'll need a result if something goes wrong when some stuff loads. Let's tab these over a little evenly. There we go. That looks nice. And let's check the event. That will need a result. Let me load this above these methods, because if this method gets called before this is instantiated, it's going to be a problem. And the result class is just very simple right now. Okay, and let's close out this video, and please download the source, because you might have a couple things off. Maybe I do, but at least we'll be on the same page.